on.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kim Mack. Welcome to the third event in the 2021 iteration of the Popular Music Books in Process series, a collaboration between the Journal of Popular Music Studies, IASPM US, and the Pop Conference, which has a new host institution, the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at NYU. As always, thank you to my co-organizers, Eric Weisbard and Carl Wilson. Last week, we had a great conversation between Will Robin and Alex Ross about Will's forthcoming book, Industry, Bang on a Can and New Music in the Marketplace. And next week, on February 9th, Giacomo Botta and Kendra Salois will be here discussing their respective books, Deindustrialization in Popular Music, Punk and Post-Punk in Manchester, Dusseldorf, Torino, and Tampere, and Values That Pay, Complicity, Sincerity, and Hip Hop in Contemporary Moroccan Life. And in case you're unaware, you can find the full 2021 schedule for Popular Music Books in Process events on the IASPM US website under the Journal of Popular Music Studies tab, as well as previous recorded sessions on Eric's YouTube channel. Today, we're excited to have A.D. Carson and Stevie Dr. Johnson here, who will talk about A.D.'s mixtape essay, I Used to Love to Dream, and Dr. View's hip hop album, Invisible Man, a work that is in conversation with Ralph Ellison's iconic novel. A.D. Carson is a performance artist and educator from Decatur, Illinois. He received his PhD in rhetorics, composition, and information design at Clemson University, doing work that focuses on race, literature, history, and rhetorics and performance. His album, Owning My Masters, The Rhetorics of Rhymes and Revolutions, was recognized by the university's graduate student government as the 2017 Outstanding Dissertation. He currently serves as assistant professor of hip hop and the Global South in the Department of Music at the University of Virginia. Stevie, Dr. Johnson, is a DJ, producer, and educator from Longview, Texas. Dr. received his PhD in Higher Education Administration from the University of Oklahoma. His dissertation, entitled Curriculum of the Mind, received the 2019 Bobby Wright Dissertation of the Year Award for the Association for the Study of Higher Education. Dr. is the CEO of the Space Program, TSP, executive producer of Fire in Little Africa, a multimedia hip hop project commemorating Tulsa's historic Greenwood district known as Black Wall Street, and manager of education and diversity outreach for the Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan Centers. After the discussion, there'll be a Q&A, which Eric will moderate. Please put your questions in the chat as they come to you, and Eric will find them there at the end of our discussion. So I will now turn things over to AD and Dr.
All right, peace to everybody. Appreciate y'all having us.
Yeah, glad to be here, honored. Really looking forward to this discussion. This is actually the first time AD and I have actually been able to collab on a project. And so I'm just truly honored and grateful to be here.
Likewise, yeah, this is should be dope. So if y'all have questions, again, throw them in the chat and we can try to incorporate those. And yeah, I think that we probably should just get started with some introductions. Steve, you want to talk a little bit about your, well, actually, I also want to hear about the dissertation as well as the hometown and then the Invisible Man project.
Yeah, so Dr. it comes from Longview, Texas. So that's my hometown, East Texas. So it's one of those things where, I just never forget where I come from. I recognize that I didn't get to this place by myself. So it's always paying homage to my hometown. And obviously, I know with you in Decatur, you're the same way. So yeah, I started DJing in an undergrad at OU, all of my degrees from the University of Oklahoma. Started DJing, self-taught. And truly hip hop has been like through and through there for me. I actually contemplated leaving OU just because of the magnitude of the racism and the anti-Blackness that I suffered. But, picking up DJing from a friend really helped me get to where I needed to be. I have a lot of experience in student affairs. So I worked at the University of Central Oklahoma for 6 years, primarily working with retention initiatives. And one in particular that really helped me kind of formulate my own identity as a DJ and as a producer was the Black Male Initiative Program. And working with those students and helping me to understand that I can truly allow people to see all of my sensibilities as a DJ, a producer, as an educator really helped me to like produce the dissertation that we're talking about. So Curriculum of the Mind was actually an extension of AD Carson's work. I think AD graduated in 2015 and he came out with a press release when he came out with the 34-track rap album dissertation. And I was in my second year of the program, either 2015, 2017, I can't remember. I think it's 2017. So 2 years into my program. And I see the press release and I call the number on the press release, not knowing it's going to be AD. He picks up the phone. I kick out all my students out of my class, out of my office. And I'm just talking to him for 2 hours, like, yo, how did you get this pass? He was like Jay-Z's blueprint. I'm like, how did you navigate this situation? And obviously I don't rap. So it was really trying to understand how I can create my own dissertation and, talking to AD and really understanding his story. It allowed me to truly recognize how I can add on the work that he was doing. So Curriculum of the Mind is actually a collective project where the students in the study either stopped out, graduated, or currently attended a historically white institution. And we were talking about the anti-Black experiences that we were facing at those institutions. So obviously writing up the dissertation, but obviously creating a space where we could discuss and record the project was a part of the dissertation as well. So that's how the Curriculum of Mind came about, came to Tulsa, and we can talk about those things later, but now I'm in Tulsa and I'm not in the academy, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a sec, but that's where the Curriculum of the Mind comes into play. So how about you?
Yeah, and also I want to also touch back on that collaborative process, because I know that also plays a bit of a role in the projects that you've done after that. But for me, I'm from I'm from Decatur, Illinois, and it's the soybean capital of the world. It's also a like it's actually one of the fastest shrinking cities. I think the third fastest shrinking city in the country. But my folks before Decatur are from Mississippi, Tennessee, and Arkansas. And I think I went out to Clemson because I think that, like I was thinking about how we love talking about hip hop when we love to talk about hip hop when it's a way that we can market our institutions as being progressive or being good or being interested in our lives and our education. But as soon as it gets a little bit uncomfortable, as soon as somebody doesn't have an explanation for what's going on, rather than asking questions to people who might be able to explain those things, and folks decide to shut it down. And I think that was related to something that I felt was, it was a really kind of I want to say it felt nasty. It felt disgusting. It felt like being used in a really odd way when I was working in a school district and I go and present about work that I was doing inside and outside of the classroom. Keep in mind, I don't rap for my students. That's not a thing for me. But I do encourage them to write the ways that they would like to write. And then as soon as something, I made a song, put it online, somebody on the radio didn't think that it was cool. And then the school district is like, well, we're going to do an investigation. I'm like, well, you don't have to investigate. You can just ask me. And I said all of the shit that you say that I said it. And I recorded it and I put it on the internet. So what do we have to investigate?
Yeah.
And I mean, at that point, then people started asking, well, who are the experts that we get to talk about this? At that point, my question is like, well, it ain't y'all. It's not your school board or whoever those people are. But then I started thinking seriously about, well, what does it mean to make an expert, to be an expert? And so I started looking at doctoral programs so that I might be able to dig further into that question. And I think that that's precisely the reason that the project ended up, the Owning My Masters ended up being the project that I released. It wasn't because I couldn't write a book. It wasn't because I wasn't interested in writing books. It was that there was so much pressure. There was so much pressure against this particular project that it felt like it was the one that needed to be done. And that continues to be the thing that I'm interested in now. It's not that I Used to Love to Dream couldn't be a book about the disconnect between where the disconnect I feel between where I'm from and where I'm at, between here and there, the past and the present and whatever the future I imagine is. And I think that, at some point that might be a compelling book to write. But the album that you hear that engages that, for you to listen to that narrative from track to track and then have to, I don't know if you're trying to make sense of it chronologically or whatever it is, I think that that's the more compelling piece of art to make. That's the more compelling document to have, because I think it speaks more immediately to the way that I feel. It's my voice. If I sound tired on that record, it's because I was tired. If I sound depressed on that record, it's because I was depressed. If I sound, all of it, the exhaustion, that's all how I was feeling at that time.
Did we lose him?
Writing it a different way would have really helped. And so I'm still interested in the same set of questions that I was asking when I started at Clemson in 2013. It's just that I'm asking them in different places now. So it's not South Carolina, and it's not just Charlottesville, but it's also how much of Decatur can I pull forward with me to where I am, and how much of that is going to go with me, into whatever the future might be. And the reason that that's so difficult is because I'm not the same dude from Decatur that I was, but I can't deny that I'm from Decatur.
Yeah.
And that's, it's like heavy to be carrying that all the time. And then to also ask yourself, what can you do about what's going on at home if you ain't at home? And so I don't know, that's, I guess sort of the why behind the thing. You want to say something?
Yeah, I just think, again, going back to place, even the name Dr. View, I understand that the only reason why I'm here, the only difference between me and the homies back home was because of the labor of a Black woman, a Black mother's love, who in times when I didn't even understand what she was trying to do, I would become frustrated. I couldn't go certain places. I couldn't do certain things. I couldn't be around certain people. So I think now, especially being in Tulsa in the 100th year of the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre, the anniversary, it really helps me to understand I was definitely placed here for a purpose, for a reason, but also not trying to forget about these privileged memories of back home, and also how those certain memories that I do have are connected to the music, connected to the scholarship, connected to the activist work within my personal projects of Invisible Man, but also being in community with other people. So, and I think, a big component of that is you talk about wrestling with those things. One thing people don't really talk about is the therapy component of this, having those opportunities to stay the space, especially as creators, as scholars, having the space to truly carve out space so that we can truly tell our stories in the way that we need to tell them. And so having that therapy component in discussion with all these particular elements, I think is something that is definitely important, that needs to be discussed and probably will be discussed in this conversation too. So.
Yeah, I said that, at the beginning of the last track of the album, it's called Asterisk, which, so the asterisk for me is kind of I say it's an asterisk I add to all my losses rather than, it being, a designation of a win that, comes with a caveat. At the beginning of the song, I say, it's not therapy, but it's what I got. And and I understand this, the music, that my music is not the same as my therapy sessions. When I'm talking to my therapist, the last thing she want to hear is me play a song. But there is a space that I'd been giving myself for a really long time, like all of that shit that happened in South Carolina. And I mean, I don't want to oversell it, but you know, it's um, like death threats and like very blatant racism and like folks being I mean, just like all just folks being arrested, you know, all of these things just happening being on campus. And the one thing that I had when I didn't have community, when I didn't have anybody else, I had music. I had a space that I made to be able to go and record. And whenever I would go to class, and you know, I had this feeling that either everybody was like real smart and I wasn't, or that everybody was pretending and I wasn't. And I didn't know which one was true. And then, and I'm like, yo, so, well, here's a space where I'm like really comfortable though. You know, like nobody's gonna tell me I can't do this. And having that, like just being able to have that, to be able to go home after having this experience where I'm like, I understand words and I know what all of these words individually mean, but I do not understand that sentence. And then going home and then trying to rephrase it and redo it and make my own thing, it freed me up because, well, I come to realize that a whole lot of people were pretending, and then making it into my own thing. It was nothing like I could admit that I didn't know stuff. I could actually admit what I was struggling with at whatever time. And this was not a place where, I mean, you know, I mean, like certainly rappers, you know, speak with a kind of like self-assuredness, but I think that this is also a place where we ask these questions of ourselves and of the world. So that, I don't know, it feels really purposeful to have this, like, I mean, to have this set of practices to rely on or to go back to. But I think that right before making I Used to Love to Dream was, or at least that comes out of like actually like carving out time and seeking out a therapist, a professional, someone that I could actually talk to and come up with some strategies about how I might deal with what I'm dealing with here, especially since I'm by myself in Charlottesville and everything has changed. I mean, literally, like the whole world is different now for me. And they're Nazis like marching down around a statue downtown. So, you know, what do we do with that? And I kept telling myself I'm good because I'm not in South Carolina anymore. And then I went to well, I don't know what, something just like something twisted, something like turned just a little bit, and then everything was off and I was so off balance. And that was really where I Used to Love to Dream came from. It came from me feeling like this is not it. Like whatever is happening right here, like it's not what was happening previously, but this, whatever is going on right now is also not the move. Right. And so we got to do something different.
So you bring up a good point, because now it kind of triggered me to think about, you know, the reason why I started going to therapy. And it actually happened after your press release came out and I went to my initial chair and said, yo, like, here's the blueprint. This is what I want to do. I'm going to write the traditional dissertation, but I need to do this, and this is why I need to do it. And it's ironically, my dissertation is about anti-Black experiences. So I'm going into this room, I'm laying out the landscape of how I want to complete this project. And the person says to me, assumptions without questions, conjecture without fact, and, you know, not knowing like programmatic guidelines make you an immature doc student. And he resigns as my chair and says, hey, you should look into other programs. And like actually sends a letter out to the whole department. And so how it's situated is when someone resigns, they're not obligated to pick you up as a student. So for 6 months, I'm in limbo. Like I know exactly what I want to do. I want to do this dissertation, but for 6 months, I don't have a chair, I don't have a committee. And so when you talk about the moment that I actually went to therapy, it's because hip hop is embedded in me, and they took the breath out of me. They literally took something that I cherish, and I knew because of the work that you did, but also because of what I was feeling within myself, that I knew I needed to do this. And so again, like, I think that was the piece, not only for therapy, but also the Invisible Man Project. The question that I was posing is, how do I make the invisible visible? Like, when I think about Ellison, I mean, a lot of people don't know, like, he's from Oklahoma City. And I was living in Oklahoma City at the time. And so, like, wanting to be in conversation with Ellison and like truly creating a project that's communal. When I think about the dissertation, it's a collective group of folks, and now I'm moving outside of the academy and I'm doing the same thing. But how do we, when people think of Oklahoma, they don't think about hip hop. They don't think about the stories that we're telling. So like, how do I make this invisible music? Like, how do I make it come to light? And yeah, I think that that therapy piece is a huge component of that process of like being comfortable in telling the story the way that it needs to be told. So I definitely agree with you on that.
I think it's also interesting that we both have this, and I recall at some point during that conversation we had in 2017, talking about Ellison, talking about Invisible Man, and me, like, almost anybody who's had a conversation with me has had this conversation about that book. But I think about it so much about, or I think so much about it as this kind of like unreliability that exists, like particularly in the prologue and the epilogue to the book. That I find myself, I know that it probably feels like I'm talking about the world, but I find myself to be the most unreliable narrator ever. And it's not because I wish to lie to you. I'm not out here like, I'm not bullshitting, like but sometimes I feel a certain way and I say a different thing. And, it's just like how it goes. And I be lying to myself all the time, which means that I probably in turn lied to the world a lot, not intentionally. And one of the things that I really wanted to try to recover in the sort of in the move from the dissertation to Sleepwalking Volume 1 and the second one was like that personal connection to something. Like, because, well, part of my question is like, how is it that you have all of this to say about all of these things, but you're like, but your connection to people is not like really there? Or what is your connection to people, and how might you facilitate that in a better way? And then coming into the academy doesn't make that better. It doesn't make it better when you're posed against people who are supposed to be like who I might want to see as collaborators, but now they're your competition. Or but I don't know if it's ever like sort of pushed to you as competition, but then folks want to say, well, Dr. View, like, well, I heard his album did, and I'm like, fam, I do not even understand the thing you're trying to have me do.
They're trying to make it an East Coast, West Coast type of thing, man.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, well, you're not really doing this if you're not doing it the way that they're doing it. And I'm like, that's weird. That's very strange, because like not too long ago, like the doing was not a thing that I was even hearing about. And that's not, but this is not about like any particular person or any particular personalities. I think that's the way that the whole shit is designed. Yeah. And so, but you can't open yourself up to say that everybody is going to be my collaborator too, because that's not going to work. And so my first year here, I think I did like 60 something events, and I'm just like all over well, I left Clemson, and I don't know, I think I went to like 3 countries back home, and then to Charlottesville, and then just started doing events. And it's like, well, there's no way people are going to know what's going on if I don't tell them what's going on. And I can't like leave it out there for people to try to interpret it on their own, because like I keep getting this feedback where people are misinterpreting what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. But that was also, reckless. Like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to be okay if I continue to put myself out there like that. So yeah, I don't know. It's so I think about Invisible Man as like as also like this space, like when I can go into this hideaway and then try to decide like which voices I am going to, like all of the voices that are circulating, which ones I'm going to sort of like pick out and sort of like throw together in order to present something back to the world. And again, I might disagree with that tomorrow. And I might have disagreed with it yesterday, but like right now, here's the thing. This is the thing. And I don't know, I feel like it's really been helpful to think with that text and to think about the text and sort of like have it speak back to me in those same ways.
Right, right. So I think we're definitely going to be talking about Ellison through and through this conversation. But I think it may be important for us to talk about particular, like, when you think about hip hop scholarship and you think about, this, it seems like people try to put us against each other, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
How do you combat that? How do you let people understand or let them know that, the work we're doing is actually in conversation with one another as opposed to like a beef? Like how do we come to an understanding that as hip hop scholars, we're also creators in a Black, like as Black creators as well, and as Black men? Like, how do we come into a fold where we don't necessarily worry about, those individuals who try to, put us against each other?
The thing, I mean, I think about the battle royale, actually. I mean, I think I think that it's important that we think about whatever that signifies, whatever that scene signifies, and how it plays out for people, or what people think it means. I have a conversation about that with all of my students, because I want them to think of each other as collaborators and not competitors. And imagine getting you can imagine this, like get a whole bunch of MCs in a room, and then you're like, all right, we about to make some stuff. And of course the MC is like, all right, I'm the best one in this room, which means that I'm going to do. And it's like, well, hold on, because we're not like, or at least the competitive thing that we're doing here, we want to make sure that it's healthy. We don't want it to be a thing. We don't want it to be something where you're trying to eliminate people from the room. We're trying to get people like sort of removed from the space so that it's only you. And so I think that most of my work is really, and it's important to tell people that it's about trying to make space for other people. It's not about myself. It's really about, if there's going to be a door that's open, I'm not trying to like slip through the crack and then like sort of close it and then lock it and then throw away the key. Like, I'm trying to find a way to like jam the door open so other folks will be able to walk through and don't have to, like contort themselves to get through the door. That's my hope. It's the same. I mean, this is one of the reasons that, it was really important for I Used to Love to Dream to have, to go through this peer review process with University of Michigan, to number one, see what it's going to be about. And then if I have to have a conversation with somebody about it, I can speak from the experience. Sure. But it's also a thing that hopefully the next person who goes through that won't have to find out all of the things I had to find out going through the process. It'll be a little bit easier because it's been done, not just from the perspective of the artist, but also from the perspective of the press. They know a little bit better what it means to take on that work, to have it reviewed, and to have the conversation back and forth with an artist about, how we present it to the world. And so I think that I'm just always thinking about how it wasn't competitive to begin with, so it's not going to start being competitive now.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about like, especially with both of our experiences, like this idea of gatekeepers. And I think you recognizing, the experiences that you're having primarily with like the publications, like you easily could just kind of hold that like yourself and like just allow people just to kind of move through life and, figure it out. I think this new concept of like gate openers and allowing like yourself like to be like transparent and authentic about those particular elements just on the business side, but I think that helps even as a creator on the like creating these projects too. And that breaks a good point for me. Just with Invisible Man, like it was an extension of the dissertation, so it was 21 artists that were on the project, and some of them didn't even know each other, and we recorded the project in 2 days. So imagine 20 MCs not knowing each other, and you're like, and me placing them on certain records, but me not giving them any direction. Like, this is, in the words of Dr. Hendry at LSU, like this idea of the epistemology of listening, like this idea of like making this sacred political act of trust that meaning will be made like through the process. And so like not putting any limitations on this, allowing people to speak, and for them to recognize that it's not a competition. Like, we're really trying to make an understanding of like making our voices visible. And so yeah, I think that's really dope. But I think it's also connected to like us being in conversation as folks who see or doing this type of hip hop scholarship, that, you know, we are being open and honest about the things that we're experiencing, and that helps us to be better creators, but also better educators for students and things of that nature. So
yeah, you know, I think that it's also, it makes me think about the fact that I have to say so often that, and I mean, I think it's probably wiser to say often that so much of what what my work is about is not hip hop. You know, that I mean, it's like using hip hop as a way of, you know, a way of knowing, a way of seeing, a way of doing, you know, like as a practice. But like, there's so many other issues that are being dealt with in the music, in the same way that, like, you know, like there's a whole lot of writing that's not about writing. And so like I might rap about rapping, or I might rap about, you know, like the process, but most of the time, like the rap is about like a whole lot of other things. And the reason that that's important is because I think that folks will, you know, very often will kind of caught up in thinking like that an album about Decatur, Illinois, is an album about like hip hop in Decatur. And it's not really, you know what I mean? Like, for me, like, I intentionally want the album to sound in certain ways. Like, I want it to signify Decatur. I want it to like sound like some space between Charlottesville and Decatur. But that's not an overt thing that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the rap house that used to sit on El Dorado Street, which would be a compelling song if I wanted to write that song. But that's not the thing that it's about.
Right.
Say what?
Sounds kind of hard right now as you talk about it.
Yeah, and so I think that, and the reason that that's important is because then that also opens up space for your. I mean, I guess I'm just always interested when like the form of it, you know, like it being rap music is interesting, but I feel like it's the least interesting part of it. And the more interesting thing is like what the music is about, and like what the music says, like what are the methods? Like, I'm interested in how do you get the, you know, you got 20 something people.
Yeah.
How do you create community and collaborate with 20 something people who don't know each other at all?
Well, I think you got to really understand the person. I think people are, what I always say is, you know, Oklahoma in particular with hip hop, we're not in the business of fans, we're in the business of community. So we're building community. As I'm having conversations with artists on a personal level, it helps me to like create the landscape of the sound. Like, my language is sound. And so I'm trying to convey a message sonically that's going to help them tell their story verbally. And so I think it's really just having conversation with folks and like understanding their experiences, their struggles, the trauma that they're battling, and how do I find samples in particular, and how do I chop them up in a way? How do I bend time in a way? How do I time stretch certain parts that truly provides like the space for them to like get the bars out and get it out in a way that's authentic to them. And so for me, I'm a DJ too. So
Yeah.
I think I started out as a DJ. I've been a DJ since 2009. And so kind of understanding like the landscape, when you're DJing, there's so much going on. You got the headphones in, you got the turntables, you got the mixer, you got someone who's coming up wanting to request a song, you got people coming in, they want you to shout them out, like, but then there's also those folks who you've never seen before, and you're trying to curate a sound transitions in a way that like speaks to them. And when you see them, the nonverbal communication, how they move, how they twitch, how they move around, like, it's like, okay, if they like this, then they like that. I think it's the same approach with making music as a producer, is that the conversation that you have with people, it helps you connect certain stories with certain people. So yeah, it really is like a curation where like you're understanding that meaning will be made in the moment once these two people or three people have a time to have a conversation with one another. But yeah, it really is just organic. I'm really trusting. I know people use that cliche, but I'm truly trusting the process and knowing that they're going to listen to the sound and speak in a way that's going to speak to them, but it's also going to speak back to me as well, because they're providing also the language that I can't necessarily articulate verbally, but I can through sound. So.
So when you, I was thinking about this as I'm listening to Invisible Man, and I understand the overarching, I understand the prompt.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in what meaning do you make of the album after the fact? Like once it's done and you've got all of the songs, and now you've got to sequence this thing, you've got to master, you got to go through a process of curating. What is the thing that you created? Like if you had to give the synopsis of that.
I think so just to give context, Invisible Man was a social experiment.
Word.
To prepare for Fine Little Africa. So I think Eric may have mentioned it earlier. Fine Little Africa is a compilation project coming out this year in May to commemorate the 1921 massacre in Greenwood, known as Black Wall Street. So as we were preparing for 60 artists to record in 5 days for that project, I said, I became anxious about how are people going to truly work with 6 studio spaces for 5 days for a total of 75 hours. So I was like, I got these beats. I knew I wanted to do something for Ralph Ellison. So I said, let me take some of these individuals and just figure out what the landscape is going to look like for Fine Little Africa. And so we recorded the project, and then we go into the mix and mastering of it. And what it becomes is I carved out the space for the artists to speak their truth, but what was returned to me was that they were also telling my story, unbeknownst to me. And so it really was this reflection of myself. It's as if I was so adamant about them making themselves visible that they made me visible, and allowed me to understand my identity and my purpose of truly not necessarily making great music with folks, but just bringing folks together and having conversations. And I think that's when you talk about the process, it's not just about, talking about hip hop, it's about the community and the conversations. And I think going back to the therapy components, the album is now therapy for me, in a sense. I still go to my therapist too, but it's a therapy project, and it's as if these artists were warping time and predicting the future. So a lot of things that you all will see with Fine Little Africa, we were talking about that, last year, about the things we wanted to see, not just in Tulsa, but in Oklahoma. So yeah, I think it's just this warping of time, and obviously connecting that to Ralph Ellison and being in multiple, spaces. But it truly is a reflection of me. And I'm not saying that in an egotistical way. I'm saying that in I'm truly feeling seen and heard and loved by myself, but also by the peers that I'm working with each and every day. So, but yeah, I'm also curious about just your process, particularly with, I used to dream. I used to love to dream, and just talk about obviously it's an extension of sleepwalking, how obviously with owning my master's sleepwalking components, what is the process now of shifting into this new phase of your life, and the experiences of working with University of Michigan Press, how was that all been an additional process or process moment for you as well? Kind of talk about that. So
yeah, I mean, this is actually it was a really long process. So there's a I made the first sleepwalking project from let's see, I defended my dissertation in March of 2017, and then I moved to Charlottesville in May, and that was, I mean, it really was like the learning curve was like pretty steep because, I mean, again, I remember going to speak at a conference and telling people, you know, like giving the same talk that I would give as a graduate student, and then having folks tweet at me like, you you seem to be unaware of the fact that, you know, like you're telling, you know, folks who are in these very kind of precarious situations to do things that would have them lose their jobs. And, you know, at that point, I'm like, well, I mean, I have a job, but I haven't worked there yet. I've never done, I haven't taught any classes, but but I had to think about that because I hadn't really considered it. And so I wrote that first project really just to do the thing that I'd always done, like to make sure that I was marking the time by reflecting and responding and, you know, doing what I do. Well, the second project, Sleepwalking 2, I was actually entertaining the idea because, you know, lots of folks were asking about, you know, publishing in all of these different ways. And I was thinking, you know, and talking with some of my colleagues about what my work might look like here at, you know, as professor of hip hop in the, you know, Department of Music. And that was tough. I mean, and it was tough not because people were making it difficult, but I think it was because folks had ideas about what it should be.
mm-hmm.
And I don't know if as many of those folks were listening to my ideas rather than like sort of trying to make my idea into theirs. And that was the difference in the conversation, like the approach. So Sleepwalking 2, I remember distinctly talking to somebody at a press about Sleepwalking Volume 2. And I sent them the lyrics, I sent them all of the tracks, everything is unmastered and everything. There's a track on there called the third track is called Kill Whitey. And you know, I stand by the song like 1,000%, you know, nothing changes. Like but I recall having this conversation after they got everything from the album where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna talk to them again. Like they're definitely not going to speak to me anymore after this. Yeah. And it was because I understood that they didn't understand what was going on. And I'm like, well, do I wait until somebody comes around who gets it, or do I just move forward? So I just threw the joint online. It was like, you know, whatever happens, happens, and you know, we'll have that conversation, or we'll have that conversation later. And but I started, you know, like just still expressing the same things that I was expressing, and I had a conversation with Lauren Kajikawa about, I mean, and not just him, but like lots of other people. And but that led to the conversation with the folks at University of Michigan Press. And then it felt like, I mean, at that point, it felt like folks were listening to like whatever the possibilities were. It wasn't like somebody said, here's the idea of what a rap album, you know, by a university press would look like. Folks were actually asking, well, what do we need in order to make it happen? Like, would this online platform be able to, you know, hold the kind of thing that you want your album to do? And I'm like, yeah, I guess it could. You know, like, well, what other things can happen with it? And the conversation was that way. It was really like they were asking me what I need in order to release the project with them, rather than telling me what I have to do in order to have the project, you know, like exist on their platform. And the things that couldn't be accommodated, they were open to going outside of their platform. And so you'll see that the album is not just on Fulcrum, but it's also on Bandcamp and on Spotify and iTunes, et cetera. And the truth is, if you go and get it on Fulcrum, then you get a whole lot more. I mean, you get, you know, some essays and you get the film and all of that. But a lot of people are not going to go to, you know, like to that website in order to get their music where they normally get music. So to me, I thought that that was, I mean, that was the most important thing. It's kind of, I mean, it's like having someone ask you what you want to be called rather than somebody trying to name you, you know?
Yeah.
And that was really, really important. And but like the actual album itself, I didn't even know I had an album. I was, like I said, I was going through all kinds of stuff and preparing to go to South Africa with one of my colleagues. And I was like, I'm gonna write this album when I get back home. Like whenever I get back to Charlottesville, I want to write an album. And at the same time, I'm just writing and I'm recording. And I don't know, like it was 2 days before it was time to leave. And I'm like, well, I think I've got a whole lot of stuff already. But because I was writing it through like fatigue and writing it through feeling, you know, like just like sort of generally fucked up about everything and like kind of not wanting to take this trip because everything felt like, you know, in disarray.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just didn't realize it. But then when I was there and I was like sort of looking through what I had, what I was going to take to try to collaborate, you know, like work with other people, I realized that I had a lot more than I thought. And so the work of finishing the album when I got back was not as difficult as I anticipated because I'd done most of like that heavy lifting, most of the writing,
Sure.
conceptualizing before we'd even gone, you know, before we'd even left, to the point that when I was there in South Africa, we were able to do a listening session for songs that appeared on the album before, you know, like the album was like even a thing. I was just able to play the songs in alphabetical order, you know, to have a kind of a feedback session about what was, you know, what was going on.
So I think maybe, should we do questions now or should we?
Yeah, I think it's probably a great moment. We've got a good long list of people who've got things that they want to ask. So if it's cool, I'm just gonna name one of the people just kind of in order and give them a chance to ask their questions directly. So Jabari Evans, activism, art, academia, and then your second question, conservatory, all that, please. Did we lose Jabari?
No, I'm here. I'm
Okay.
sorry. I'm in transit. That's why I was putting my stuff in the chat. I've talked to AD extensively. Peace, AD, by the way, and peace to Dr.
Peace.
Q. You know, as I've been moving through my own dissertation and my book project, I've been thinking about just what we talked about with your process of publishing, and not even just publishing, but getting your dissertation approved, and thinking about like the resistance that you received. And one of the things that I was thinking about is if you weren't so visible, because you were on plenty of websites and plenty of, you know, news sites, plenty of people covered you as the first, right? The Jackie Robinson of the thing, right? So part of it to me is like, if you weren't first in making this niche, would it have been as interesting to the Academy to allow you to have this niche that you've been able to create for yourself? And then because of that, has there been creative constraint to the things that you try to do? Since you are the first, and that's probably why they want to make their vision your vision, right? The second thing is more in line with my dissertation and thinking about like, does hip hop belong in academia? You know, just simply put, as someone who's been in hip hop from the commercial side of it, through the label side of it, you know, and this is just me being a devil's advocate, because it's what I do in my dissertation, is I've ran across plenty of people who feel like it just doesn't belong there, the same way I've ran into a lot of jazz people who feel like it doesn't belong there. And what are your thoughts on it?
Word. Well, I think that, like I said, peace, and I appreciate the questions. I think that, so your first question brings up this interesting thing that also should definitely be said, and that is, I think that the kind of pathology that I think is associated with like with certain forms of Black art, Blackness, Black bodies, Black people, and certainly with hip hop, in such a way that I think a lot of times when people talk about hip hop in the academy or hip hop in spaces where folks don't expect it to be, they're actually speaking from a place of thinking about like hip hop as being undeserving of being in those places. And so I think that they're thinking like, well, like, this guy from Decatur like makes it from the streets into the academy, as if that's the story, and it's not really. And so I think that there's something correct about that. The way that it's being talked about, like, is focusing on focusing on the vehicle and not what's inside. And they're also like focusing on the vehicle being out of place. It's not needing to be here. And so like it's some kind of like it's something foreign to a whole lot of folks. And it's also something that the academy somehow is like is making better, like by its like sort of being responsive to it, which I also don't agree with. And so yeah, that probably is true. But I don't feel like I was constrained. I actually felt the need. I think I might have been constrained by like my own. I mean, what I was like probably thinking was integrity but it was just like being stubborn. And that is, I have to do these things in this way in order to feel like I'm being, real to myself whenever I do it. And therefore, I turned down a lot of opportunities that might have been okay. But the reason that they weren't was because I'm like, well, that shit's corny. Or that's just not something that I want to be associated with at this point. And but I think that I'll also just say that knowing that I had understanding colleagues that I might be able to go to and talk to, even if folks didn't understand what was going on, they would listen and then say, well, this is what this sounds like, and this is what that sounds like. And it wasn't like folks are saying, here's the solution, but folks at least saying, we support you, or we support you doing the kind of thing that you want to be doing. And I think that it's really important that I didn't feel alienated, even while I was confused or not really knowing what the project was going to be or what the next thing was going to be. I didn't feel like I was sort of left out to figure it out on my own without being able to talk to somebody about how it might like work with my job or how it might work within the space where I am. And that's, I think, that was an important part of also being in that graduate program. As much as the like Clemson was a hotbed for racism and white supremacy, and the same with Charlottesville, there was still a community there at that place that made the conditions for me making that album.
Enough water today?
That made the conditions for making that album okay. And I think the same thing here in Charlottesville, is being able to be in community with some folks that I might be able to talk about the work with, that doesn't make it feel like I'm just like working by myself, even if the album is just me or me and a few people that I work with.
If I can, I want to add a couple things. So I think about these institutions and who labored and built these institutions, folks that look like me. And, we've always heard these stories of like Black people don't even need to be in the academy, but it's like, why not when we built them? And so that's my first thing. The second thing is, and I'm going to discuss some things that's not even public yet. So when I think about hip hop in the academy, obviously AD, myself, potentially Jabari, I'm sure you're going through similar experiences. Like it's really difficult to try to get these things passed in the ways that we want to do them, while also maintaining the parameters that we have. And so I think one thing is like, we just really got to just lean into our sensibilities and hold on to that, and not be afraid to like let people know where we stand with those things. But I also think that obviously hip hop is bigger than the academy, and I'm going to say why. I don't work in the academy, not because I didn't want to, but it just didn't happen for me at this moment. I work for the Woody Guthrie and the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and when the opportunity was presented to me with this job, I just raised my hand. I said, what does a hip hop scholar have to do with Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan? Straight up, like, I need to understand the connection. And when my job told me about, really pulling the sensibilities of Woody and the creative process of Bob and being able to formulate programs and ideas around that, it helped inspire the Find Little Africa project. So what I'm getting to is that when you lean into your own creativity, your own like ideas of how you see your own scholarship, regardless of the academy, you're able to build and create things and establish communities with folks who you never thought you would be able to do. And so, Find Little Africa is working on some potential label deals right now. It's an education project that's now evolving into a mainstream project. And so I just want to encourage you, regardless of what you're experiencing right now, like truly lean into those things. Obviously, for me, the AERA, American Education Research Association, has a hip hop SIG with the likes of David Stovall and Bettina Love and Christopher Emden and Ahmad Washington. And those were the folks who I leaned on, Gloria Latson Billings. Those are the folks that I leaned on that helped me kind of navigate through those particular elements. So I think once you find your community, you'll realize that the powers that be aren't really the powers that be. They're just folks who are trying to hold you or compress you in certain ways. But I definitely want to encourage you to just to keep leaning on what you're doing, and you're asking the right questions. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Let me turn it over to Tyler Bunzy with a books question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both for sharing. It's been an incredible talk so far. But yeah, my question is kind of on how you engage with audience in making work like this. And in my question, I ask, how do you approach the Academy's over focus on the book project and article or article as the foundation of knowledge creation while trying to train people to engage in the different kinds of interpretive processes that hip hop requires? So I'm thinking about engaging with sound even in general is already an issue, right? But if we think about how people interpret persona, live performance practices, the art of the interview in hip hop, these things that are kind of foundational to understanding and interpreting kind of classic hip hop albums. How do you, or do you engage with that at all when thinking through how this work resonates in the Academy?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Tyler. I think that so with Sleepwalking 2, one of the things that I did was very intentional. I mean, it's to kind of think about we're already thinking about the album as a metaphor anyhow, right? That it's not for most people a thing, like a physical thing anymore. Even though there were vinyl copies of I Used to Love to Dream, they're gone now. But but what I did was, when I started, the reason that I call it a mixtape essay is not because the mixtape essay is doing a different thing than an album is. It's because I want for folks to understand that I'm in conversation with the kind of thing they do. And so then they're starting to think a project like Sleepwalking 2 is 5 tracks. It's 15 minutes. I think that it functions very much in the way that an academic book might. If someone were to look at it, in those ways. I do that intentionally, but don't explicitly say it because, well, then, I think I'm giving away too much if I do that. But once you see that, then I think that you understand maybe how to engage it or how you engage it as it relates to the other kinds of academic products that you're engaging in. And so then when you get to the middle of the album and the song Kill Whitey is there, it doesn't seem as odd, or it doesn't seem to shock as much as it does to know that the song itself exists, because you realize that there's something before it and something after it that kind of contextualizes it. And if you don't get that, if you don't understand that I'm giving you these instructions about how to engage with it, then yeah, I think that you're going to miss that. But I think that that's maybe the reason that the the album is an album and not a book as well. You know, like there are lots of things that we tell graduate students and undergraduate students about how to read particular, I mean, you know, you're gonna read a book of short stories much differently than you're gonna read an instruction manual. And you're going to listen to a thing that someone is calling a mixtape essay differently than you're going to listen to, you know, like a different kind of sound project. And so, but I mean, again, I very intentionally state that so that when like you're listening to I Used to Love to Dream on Spotify, you're probably like listening for a different thing than maybe you're listening for on the University of Michigan site. And if you're reading an essay to prepare you to listen to I Used to Love to Dream, you're going to have different information than someone who read, you know, like, or like heard a thing on NPR or something about it. And I think that happens with all of the ways that we listen to music or we engage media. I think that we have to be more intentional. I feel like it's necessary to be more intentional about rap because folks keep, you know, like trying to oversimplify rap. You know, and like, but that's in their heads, not like, it's not because rap is simple, or it's not because rap isn't doing all of these things. It's because folks believe that they can reduce it to this thing and then like sort of like, I heard of it, and therefore I know enough about it and I don't really have to engage with it. You know, like any other kind of any other media you try to engage in that way, you're going to be unprepared whenever the conversation comes.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Let me bring Maya Smith into the conversation with some questions about student projects and approaches.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this. This has been really giving me life, just hearing you two talk about the amazing work you do. So I've started implementing creative projects in my classroom. And so I'm in French studies and I teach a lot on sort of post-colonialism in the Francophone world. And, you know, students always have the ability to do a normal research project, but I give them the possibility of doing something creative. And so students have done podcasts, comic books, paintings, created music, spoken word, short stories, a whole array. Basically, they come to me and tell me what they are thinking of doing, and we come up with a plan. And so based on your own pushing the boundaries of scholarship, I was wondering if you have any suggestions on types of projects that students can do, undergraduate students can do in the classroom that build on some of the things that you've been talking about.
Yeah, well, so I teach this class called Composing Mixtapes. Those students, it's just like 15 students who don't know each other and they have to make an album together over the course of the semester. And I think that, you know, like maybe Dr. View could talk to this, speak to this a little bit more. I mean, it seems like what I'm asking my students to do is a lot like the process that his projects have gone through. Except that I don't give them any beats or anything. They have the equipment, they have a room, you know, like a space to record, and then I give them some instructions for their first project, and then just kind of let them go and keep bringing them back to text and bringing them back to conversation, and then pushing them farther. But it's really to try to create that sort of creative, collaborative, critical engagement, and that has been, it's been interesting, but it's also been like, it's been a learning experience for me because what I'm asking them to do very often is not the same process that I go through because I generally work with people that I know. I work with people I trust. And I usually, like, I'm not calling people up that I don't know or I don't trust. But they take it in stride, and I've been impressed each semester that I've taught that class with not just what they learn, but what they create. And the fact that they are learning from each other all of these things that I don't have to explicitly outline. You know, if I say, well, I don't know if anybody knows how to make a beat, but you have to get a beat and you have to make a song. You know, like there's some tutorials online and here's a machine that you can do it with, and they do it. And you know, like, honestly, they spend much more time doing, and I've had to tell several of them, you know, you need to go to your other classes, you need to go do your work. But, you know, like, they spend a lot of time in that rap lab. And they also come there even when they're not doing work. You know, we've got like a little library set up there. We've got some records there. And it's a space, like it really is a space where they feel like they're like sort of, you know, like they're at the university, but they're not like in it. You know, they're not like sort of operating by its rules by being in that room, which means that they spend a whole lot of time in what is a classroom, but they find it to be something other than that, something a whole lot more and something a whole lot different than that. And I don't know, like that's just, well, one of the classes. And I try to have open up the space for them to just do creative projects regardless. And I don't tell them they can't write essays. I just tell them that I want them to try, and you know, and failing at the project doesn't mean that you get an F on it. You know, failing at the thing that you try doesn't mean, like, I learn a lot from failure all the time, and I make sure to let them know that.
I think just maybe to add on, I take note of all the identities that the students occupy. So a part of the research design for the dissertation was not just to have, you know, rappers but also just, do we have producers? Do we have engineers? Do we have graphic designers? Do we have just student leaders? Do we have photographers? Like all these different elements that people do outside of the confines of academia. And then that allows for the students to kind of figure out, based upon whatever, you know, project you decide to do, but it provides them the space to be able to create something that maybe is out of what you imagine as a professor. So that's just something else I would consider, like truly, again, you're being a DJ at this point and figuring out, okay, these people, this class looks totally different from the class I have, you know, later in the evening. And so really shaping and forming the creative process is something that I think you will thoroughly enjoy, and just allowing to trust the process. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And it is true. My students spend way much more time on their creative projects than they do on their research papers, but they enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Couple more. We'll need to go into sort of lightning round, I think, as we get later into the evening. So David Sussman.
Thank you guys both for a really great conversation. I'm just really interested in what you were saying about being a gate opener. And I was wondering if you could say more about the nuts and bolts of that. And one of the things I was thinking about was the mechanics of working with University of Michigan Press, and I put that in the chat, and then Sarah Cohen put a link there, so there was a little more info there. But I'm just wondering, like, if you could open that up maybe a little bit and say more what you imagine is involved in keeping this gate open, so that it's not, you know, as Jabari was saying, like that you guys are the firsts, and then it kind of, you know, the door's going to close again.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead, bro.
Oh yeah, go ahead. You got it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think sometimes the music side of things can really reflect like this positivist mindset that's in the academy, and I think just from the places that we occupy, myself and AD, like we just really come from humble beginnings. Like, you know, there's just certain experiences that got us to where we're at now, and we're just truly grateful for that. And so for us, like, doing hip hop is second nature to us, because this is just who we are. Like that's what we embody. And so when we think about, you know, how we got to this point and understand, like, we have now an honored responsibility to like shift how culture, what culture could look like, particularly hip hop culture could look like in the academy. It allows us to hold each other accountable and say, yeah, these certain people didn't talk to us in our program, or like when we reached out, they didn't respond in the way that we felt that they should have. So how do we recognize that? How do we put our egos to the side? And how do we, whether support one another, collaborate on certain things, which I think we plan to in the future, just as a side note. But how do we open space for other folks, and particularly not just Black males, like in this space, like Black women, Black trans? Like, how do we carve out the space to where we're not just the gate openers, but now we're giving copies of the keys to everybody. And now we're in a space where we can be creative as Maya. Like, now we have our own collective of folks who are now determining what the scholarship needs to look like moving forward, and how do we hold the presses that be, the publications that be, like, accountable to say, like, hey, if you want to work with us, like, this is what the work looks like moving forward, and this is how we're going to connect this to the community, and this is how we're going to tell our personal story, but also have space to have scholarship and conversation. So that's what it is for me. I think and obviously my approach is very different from AD because I'm not in the academy, but I think the work that I'm doing outside of the academy is going to have clear implications on how I can support the work that AD is doing and provide him with, certain business things that I'm learning on the industry side, to prepare him for his next publication or press, or things of that nature, and vice versa. So I think it's more just, how do we hold ourselves accountable, and how do we leverage the history and the experience, the knowledge, but also the space, and how we want to truly reimagine what this world looks like moving forward, is really what I meant by gate openers. I consider, you being a gate opener just in the mindset of, like, wanting to understand what that is. And so I would equate this idea of gate opener as being, in the words of Bettina Love, being a co-conspirator. So I just generally think this is an opportunity, like, we're in a real good place with the scholarship to really leverage how we see the things moving forward.
And I think some of it also, I mean, there are some things that are going to be, I mean, it seems like it's, like, really simple, but it's also really complicated. Because it's not like hip hop has not been at folks' universities forever. And that's the thing that we probably should understand. And so, like, even if someone says, well, someone finally did a rap album dissertation in 2017, and I'm thinking, it took until 2017 that this thing happened in this way. Or, with the, with I Used to Love to Dream album, the same thing. It took until 2020 for that to happen. So, well, what was the holdup? And I think part of it is that, what are the incentives for doing those kinds of things? If you have, I guess, everything to lose, I don't know that you want to put everything in the rap basket. And for me, I felt like, well, that's not losing to me, but that's not the case for a whole lot of people. Because if my dissertation was not accepted, I felt like it was still a solid album, and I was going to do whatever I needed to do with that album moving forward and go do something else. Same thing with this project, or with Sleepwalking 2. When it didn't work out, I still put it out and I still moved forward. I don't know how that's going to work with, with the folks at my university, or what they might think about it. But I guess we'll get to that whenever we get to it. So I don't know. I think it also has to do, we have to do something about, or at least speak to and think about what the incentives for taking the risks might be for people who are going to take the risks. Otherwise, people aren't going to do it. And so that's a question that, I think we're all charged with. If we want to see different kinds of work, then how are we making that work possible? And also, how are we making sure that people know about the work? Because, that's another part of it. Folks wouldn't know about hip hop without hip hop journalists, or without journalism that, like, really got into what folks were trying to do in their work. If there's a scholarship that's out here that somebody's doing it, but then nobody's reviewing it, nobody's thinking about it, nobody's talking about it, they're saying that it's cool, but, like, it's also, like, way over here, just, like, sort of doing its thing, then I don't know why anybody would, if folks want to be in conversation with folks, or in a conversation, if people aren't, like, engaging them in that way, then I think that they're going to be swayed away from doing that.
I think that might be a solid place for us to hit pause for tonight. I think this has been a terrific conversation, and thank you so much to both of you for joining Popular Music Books in process.